Let's face it, electric car rebates and incentives are pretty darned controversial. While they're not available everywhere in the world, some countries just don't offer any form of incentives, while others offer massive ones. They're often described by certain political groups as being nothing more than state-sponsored perks that make it easy for already rich people to, quote, buy a fancy electric car they don't need. In fact, I think I'd go as far as to say that electric vehicle tax incentives and rebates are just as controversial in some areas as gay marriage, transgender people serving in the military, and immigration. And that, unfortunately, makes them an easy target for politicians wanting to score quick points with their core supporters. Which is why, in the US right now, federal incentives for electric cars are on the chopping board as part of the new House GOP tax bill. If approved, the tax bill will completely end all electric vehicle tax incentives forthwith and consequentially severely hammer the sales figures of cars like the Nissan Leaf, Chevrolet Bolt EV, and Tesla Model 3. I honestly don't think that it will affect Model S and Model X sales so much, but I'll come to that in a second. I'm aware, of course, that electric car tax rebates and incentives are a very sore point, and I'm also aware that if I discuss the specific situation in the US right now, I'm likely to get a large amount of hate mail. So for today's video, instead of discussing the ins and outs of the political landscape in the US right now, I'm going to ask a very simple question. Should taxpayers pay for electric car rebates? And is there a better alternative? Right now, if you're in a country where electric vehicle tax breaks or incentives are offered, the chances are that some of the money is funded through taxpayer funds. However, while some funds do usually come from tax dollars, it's a misnomer to refer to incentives as being wholly paid for by taxpayers. And in some places, that's not even true. For example, Norway, which has the most generous plug-in vehicle incentive of any nation in the world, funds its plug-in car tax breaks and incentives via its massive sovereign wealth fund, essentially a massive state-owned portfolio of investments worth over $1 trillion or $190,000 for every one of its citizens. And when you look at it like that, it makes sense that Norway does offer such incredible incentives and why it's working. Oh, and if you're interested where the sovereign wealth fund got a lot of its money from, well, that's come from Norway's massive oil and gas industry, which makes the incentives even more apt. But back to the question at hand, should taxpayers pay for electric car incentives? Well, right now, taxpayers pay for massive tax breaks and incentives for the oil and gas industry, not to mention massive tax write-offs for those buying commercial vehicles over a certain weight. So it makes sense that some tax rebates should be offered for electric cars too. For example, in 2013 in the US, the oil and gas industry was subsidized by the federal government to the tune of $2.3 billion, with more than 90% of that money in the form of tax write-offs rather than direct funding or research and development dollars. And in the US, the pledge from Donald Trump to make America great again, which inexplicably includes reigniting the coal industry when coal is now a far more costly industry per kilowatt hour than photovoltaic solar panels, means even more subsidies will be going to the fossil fuel industry. In short, offering one industry tax breaks while taking them from another seems unfair at best. But when you take into the account any environmental damage caused by the fossil fuel industry, it seems logical that less polluting technologies, even after considering the environmental impact of battery production, should earn more tax breaks. Yet, just offering blanket tax breaks isn't all that helpful to the adoption of plug-in cars either. For a start, critics are right. Funding $7,500 tax break on each new car sold, regardless of its sticker price, does mean that those who really could afford to pay the extra money are getting something for deciding to switch to electricity when they really don't need the incentives. And those who want to buy a used electric car, but who are struggling to make up those few extra $1,000 to buy one, get nothing. That's very unfair. So what about means testing grants? Well, that's certainly a possibility, but the reality is this creates extra paperwork that nobody likes, and someone somewhere will take advantage of it, just as people tried to do with the now threatened US tax rebate program for EVs. The end goal, of course, is to help electric vehicles become the same cost as petrol or diesel vehicles. And in cases where automakers have made plug-in models the same price as conventional petrol or diesel models, look at the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid in the UK as an example, people have widely gone for the plug-in model because it's cheaper to own in the long run. So, is there a better, more equitable way of doing this? Well, one way around this would be to incentivise automakers rather than buyers, penalise low gas mileage vehicles with carbon taxes, but then award automakers for building zero tailpipe emission vehicles. That way, making and developing cleaner, greener vehicles is more cost effective and attractive for automakers than building gas guzzling SUVs or pickup trucks. And while automakers are likely to moan more about it, just look at the kerfuffle over CAFE standards, they've also proven that they'll meet the standards if their bottom line depends on it. But what about you? Who do you think should pay for incentives for plug-in vehicles? Should we have any at all? And how do we continue to encourage people to shift to plug-in cars? I can't wait to hear your thoughts. That's it. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.